Drew here, and I started watching episode 6 of The Nevers, and my wife knew that I had started the show. Alas, she's not watching it with me, and she came into the room and said, "I thought you were going to watch The Nevers." And I said, "This is The Nevers." And she said, "What kind of show is this?" And I turned to her and she said, "What is going on?" And I said, "I don't know." And that was honestly the truth. This episode of The Nevers, we had all had theories about what might be going on with Amalia. I had theorized that she had some kind of alien or otherworldly consciousness in her body. And a lot of you had theorized that she was a time traveler from the future, and that was why she seemed kind of out of her place. And otherwise, I had theorized that the Galanthi were an alien race that had come to help humanity to fight some kind of problem that was a threat to our existence. And many of you had theorized that they were time travelers from the future that had come back in time to make sure that humanity continues to exist in the future. And it turns out Joss Whedon and the writers were sitting in the writers' room and they said, well, it's both. And this episode was very, very complicated. As a episode of The Nevers, it was a pretty good, very interesting episode. As a mid-season finale that in some ways feels more like a finale to a season, since we're going to have such a long gap before we get the rest of the season. I'm not sure how well it suits, since we really didn't spend that much time with the majority of the characters. I feel like they kind of needed maybe one more episode to kind of set the stage for the rest of the season and to kind of give us a little bit of time with the rest of the characters. We didn't even see a good number of the characters this episode, but nonetheless, this is the episode we got. And as I said, the first 27 minutes, the first chapter, Stripe, was very, very confusing, and I would put this down to a number of factors. One, it was kind of a cold open where we're dropped into this situation where we don't really know what's going on, and we have to pick it up the way that we pick up everything in the Nevers, from conversations that the characters are having and from context clues. The problem here is that the characters were talking in very, very jargon-heavy dialogue, and I actually eventually turned on the subtitles because it was virtually impossible to understand what they were saying, because they kept throwing in words and phrases that have no meaning apart from this show. And that's realistic, but it's just not helpful when you're trying to figure out what's going on in an unfamiliar setting. And some of this, I think, is intentional on the writer's part, because they want to hold a few of their mysteries close to their chests yet, even as they reveal a few things. But it wasn't helpful from the perspective of getting my bearings. But eventually I sorted out the majority of what was going on. It seems that this character, Stripe, played by Claudia Black from Farscape, is in this future where it mirrors the past of Victorian London in a lot of ways, in that you've got this free life group that seems to be fighting what they think is an alien invasion by the Galanthi, and they've killed numerous of the species, and there's only one left alive. And Stripe is a member of the Planetary Defense Coalition, or the PDC, as they refer to themselves, and they're trying to contact the Galanthi and figure out what they want and get them back through these portals. And basically the episode, there's only two characters you need to focus on. They don't tell you their names until, or at least they don't tell you the Stripe's name until the very end, but they refer to themselves by their role, the Stripe, and then there's the Clipper, who seems to be some kind of a healer. And their dynamic seems in some ways to mirror the dynamic of Penance and Amalia in the first 5 episodes of the series. And here you see them grappling with the loss of hope. They're in this very kind of, I would describe it as a generic sci-fi / dystopian world. And they believe that maybe the Galanthi are there to help them, and they're trying to help it get back through this portal. And the Galanthi seems to make these connections with these people that get powers. Now, they're not the same kind of powers that we see the Touched having, but they are powers of empathy and understanding of the Galanthi. And these people are called spores. And ultimately, it seems that, this free life person who they have held captive breaks free with the help of one of their own, and pretty much everyone gets shot. And the death of the Clipped causes the Striped character to inject herself with something to kill herself. But then, just as she's dying, she gets grabbed by the consciousness of the Galanthi, and it seemingly transports her through the portal back to Victorian England. Now, there's a possibility that this is all some kind of simulation, because they had materials from Victorian England in this cubbyhole in this part of the story. So it's a little bit unclear if that's what's going on, if perhaps this isn't real what's going on in Victorian England, or if perhaps there's some kind of 12 Monkeys style time loop where Amalia ends up in the future again after her time with the Touched in Victorian England. It's really, really hard to say how this is all going to turn out. And like I said, the writers are clinging tight to a few of their mysteries, even as they give us a lot of insight into what's actually going on with Amalia. Now, this first chapter of the story, like I said, it was very, very confusing. And in a lot of ways, I feel like it was just too much too quickly. If you're going to set up this much in 27 minutes, I feel like you have to do a lot more exposition so the audience has its bearings. Now, I get it. They're trusting us. They're trusting us to come in and to take notes and to watch this sequence multiple times and to figure it all out. But to me, I think that you should be able to do that if you want to enhance your experience, but you should be able to watch a show without doing homework, I feel personally. And I feel like this show doesn't really fit into that category of show. I feel like it takes a little bit more homework than I would personally care for. I think it's a very, very nerdy show in that regard. And nonetheless, I do feel like if you focus on the two characters of the Striped character and the Clipped character, I feel like you can more or less understand what happens in this opening. My main question was which one of them was Amalia, but apparently the Striped character did the thumb thing that Amalia always does. So it seemed pretty clear that that was her. So knowing this little bit of backstory for Amalia, knowing that she gets pulled into the body of this character of Molly, who was married to a baker and didn't marry for love and committed suicide. This sequence was less essential because ultimately it seems like there's nothing of Molly left in Mrs. True. It's just the name and the background that people think they know about her, but ultimately this isn't actually who she is, because it doesn't seem as though the Striped character has any conception of who was in this body before. In fact, she doesn't even seem to realize she's in another body until she realizes how different her hands are. So to me, this section of the story, it went by rather quickly, but it was fine because it was less necessary. It wasn't really establishing anything that we needed to know. The third chapter, it sets up the relationship between Amalia and Sarah, who, to me, if she's some kind of mastermind actress, I don't see the evidence of it here either. But nonetheless, you do see her and Amalia's relationship forming, and how Amalia betrayed her into the trust of Dr. Haig by telling Dr. Haig about Sarah's visions of these lights in the sky. We also see the start of Amalia's relationship with Horatio, who seemingly for the first time discovers that he is one of the Touched and that he has healing powers. I thought that he had perhaps the line of the episode when he said, "Yes, aliens from the future came back and gave us powers. It was right before me." I felt like it was just a humorous line and well delivered by the actor. And I did buy the chemistry between Amalia and Horatio, particularly in this scene. I haven't really gotten a bead on their relationship yet, perhaps because it's largely peripheral in the first 5 episodes. But here, it starts to make a little bit more sense as you get context for how it started. But I was surprised that they actually ended the episode with the attempt to get to the Galanthi that are housed underground, that are being guarded by these soldiers, and Lavidia and Dr. Haig have been trying to investigate, because I really thought that they might end the episode without getting to this, because so much had happened in the episode already and there was so little time left, and I just didn't expect them to try to stuff this in. But they did, and there was, a brief little flurry of action. Amalia has this excellent monologue where she conveys some of the desperation she's feeling and how she doesn't know what her mission is. She doesn't know why the Galanthi sent her here, and she's just lost in an era that she doesn't really understand, and she's pretending to be someone she isn't. I thought the accent work from the actress this episode was a little bit spotty, but I did appreciate the explanation of the fact that she was a Canadian originally, and then she's putting on this British accent to fit in during the period. So I think that's an interesting twist. Some of you had guessed some of this based on references that Amalia had made and things that she had said, so good on you. I missed these, guess they were too subtle for me. But it's an interesting twist, and it's interesting in a way because I haven't really heard her using the jargon that the characters were using in the sci-fi future. So to me, she came across as like a modern Canadian. She didn't come across as someone from the future. So that's interesting. I feel like they could have perhaps given hints at that even without giving the game up. But nonetheless, I think it's a good twist. And it's a good twist in part because some of you were able to guess it because there were hints of it. I didn't guess it, not for lack of looking for clues, but like I said, my philosophy is a little bit different than some of yours. I don't think shows should have too much homework, but some of you clearly studied this out very, very carefully. But this final sequence, we got to see a little bit more of Augie's powers. He seemingly used some birds to attack a soldier that was coming after Amalia. We got this excellent monologue speaking to Amalia's desperation, and then we got back to where we were at the end of last week's episode. And Amalia and Penance have this final moment where they kind of set the stage for the next half season whenever it comes. And to me, like this conversation, I think that Penance and Amalia are the strongest characters in the show, and their dynamic together is one of the most wonderful things in the show. I think that you see that Amalia sees in Penance perhaps some of the spirit of this clipped person that died and her desire for hope. And in a sense, she is her heart and her conscience, as some of you have pointed out. And I think that, as she says, we're going to tell the rest of the group everything that's going on, that we're going to have definitely a new dynamic going into the next half season, whenever that arrives. I'm not sure how well this worked as a half season finale when you know that you're not going to get episodes for a really, really long time, potentially not even till 2022. I think that they called it a half season so that we wouldn't think of this as a season finale, but for all intents and purposes, it is a season finale. And as a season finale, I'm not sure that it is the best one. It gave us a lot of information, which I respect them for not holding back more, but I feel that it could have done more to set the stage for the next half season. There was one last twist that didn't really get explained a ton, but when Amalia was talking to the Galanthi organism that was in the underground area, she got sucked into some kind of vision where she saw Myrtle, and Myrtle said to her, "You didn't think you were the only one that got pulled through the portal, but I'm not going to let you remember this," or something to that effect. So it's interesting. I'm not sure if this means specifically that Myrtle is another person from the future who got pulled into the portal, or if it means that, simply put, that someone else got pulled through the portal and that this organism is just using the form of Myrtle to disguise, who that person is, and that we'll find out who the person actually is at some later point. I'm sure there are a lot of good theories could be Hugo Swan, could be a number of other characters who don't seem to serve as much of a purpose within the larger story. We're going to have to wait a very, very long time to find out. So I'm sure some of you will Reddit the heck out of this and figure it out in the meantime. But if you do, don't let me know, because I'd kind of like to figure it out either for myself or when the showrunners choose to reveal it. That's my preferred method of discovering things. But do let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments. Those are just my thoughts for what they are worth. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews of other shows, please consider subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching.